dude, I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies, welcome back to another episode of The Farm. Sitting down, me and my boy Code, also Tanky on the ground doing his thing, Taylor behind the gizmos and the gadgets, making it all happen. But we're kind of going around some of the concepts. Some of the things that we started talking about is if you guys don't know, I'm a bit of a reader. I think that's like how I've consumed majority of the information in a lot of different ways, as well as like really reading into some things. But I think also we're kind of talking around that mindset too. It's like, oh, well, it's on the internet, so it must be true. Well, another one of those is like, well, it's in a book, so it must be true. I think at the end of the day, when we're kind of looking at some of these resources and we're learning from some of these things, one of the things to stay mindful of is like, there's a human that's either writing that content, creating that content, right? Either creating a course or doing whatever. Like there's a human being behind all of these things. And even in academia, when we look at some of this stuff too as well, it's like even things that we used to teach in college or other things, we figured out like there's things right now that are being taught in college that we know at the forefront of that community that this is no longer accurate or it actually doesn't work very well. And let's say if it's like a marketing class or let's say it's a science class and we've had new discoveries or all these other things, and usually it takes 5 to 10 years, right, of some of these things getting updated at the academia level. But also, too, obviously, there's books coming out, hundreds of books coming out, thousands and thousands of books, actually, probably tens of thousands of books that are being released every single year. Ebooks are a whole different thing, too. So we're kind of just like talking about the idea of certain books and consuming information and how it could be applicable or how we should kind of go through that filtering process. But one of the things I want to throw back to you, Code, is obviously not too long ago, my man he's getting further and further away. He was in college, but also the reason I wanted to bring it up specifically though with you is because when we first started doing some training together, you were in these classes like at the academia level, but then also practically kind of seeing how they're playing out with athletes. And then right afterwards, which a lot of people didn't have the opportunity to do, is like making these directly applicable. Even some people that go to college for these things, they will get into the coaching realm and like they don't even have the tools to be able to measure any of this stuff. They can't really like play it out where obviously you fell into a situation that you could kind of like use a lot of these cutting edge tools and then also directly with athletes right afterwards. But what was kind of like your process there, right? Like as your perspective of being like in school, but then also seeing it play out at the same time and then making that transition. What are some things that you learned from like academia to like practical world?
So I'd say I had some really good professors, first of all. I think just like anything, like there's good plumbers, there's bad plumbers, there's great professors, there's bad professors, so there's good coaches and bad coaches, so on and so forth. And so one, I was super fortunate and blessed to have some really good professors, in my opinion. And so I think one of the messages that was kind of given off to me from a young age in college, so like freshman, sophomore year in college, was a lot of times like the information was a foundation that was supposed to give you some structure, but the structure should give you freedom, right? And so that idea of the structure is good, right? It's a good baseline, a good foundation, but that doesn't mean it's everything. It doesn't mean, in the heat of the moment, right? If somebody's life is on the line, yes, this is the structure, this is generally, but with your experience, with your instincts, with practice, with time, whatever, right? You could have found a more efficient way to solve this problem. And that structure should give you freedom to maybe skip a step if that's what's needed in that particular moment. I'm not saying from like a nurse or doctor perspective where, looking more like PT or occupational therapist is kind of like my background. Yeah. And so, I had some professors that were very good about like, hey, this is all really good information to have, but it's not gospel. It's not the end of knowledge. This is this book was published in 2008, and everybody's always, and like they gave us examples. I can't remember the exact numbers. It's like, there's more PTs in the last 3 years, get through PT school than ever, in the whole 2000s, literally in the last 3 years, and they're all trying to find new methods. So like, there's so many things being learned, and innovation happening so rapidly that like books can't even keep up with it at that point in time.
Yeah.
And then also too, there's some innovation that's happening that's not effective as well, right? And so I just think that message was made pretty clear for me. It's like, hey, we're going to learn this stuff, but also there's a reality, there's an application portion to it all. And I saw that with hitting too. It's just, hey, some of these things are really good concepts, and there's wisdom to it, but also that doesn't mean that that's the end of it. Like, it's not a period. You know what I mean? It's not the end of the paragraph.
And you had, correct me if I'm wrong, one of your instructors was a actual practitioner.
Yeah.
Right? Where what I mean by this is, for example, you would be amazed how many people are doing classes on business but have never had a business. Mm-hmm. And then you'd say, okay, well, maybe they've worked at a high level, and the thing was like, no. There's a lot of people that go to school for business, get their master's degree in business, right? And then start teaching business and never actually like practically like went forward with some of these things, which obviously leaves some gaps, I would say more so in perspective. And because of, along with this, right, is you get this white and black thinking. Well, this is kind of how the world works. It's like a perspective that starts happening where it's like, and it almost becomes, and what I mean by like gospel or like a Bible in this way is like thinking where, first off, the Bible isn't even like this. Hey, in this exact situation, I'm going to do X. Like, right? Again, there is philosophical underpinnings. There is other things for us to be considered. And also too, there's obviously always going to be nuances and grays and where we're going to have to use experience. There's things that are going to happen in your career that will only happen once or never, constantly with different athletes. And so one of the things that I think is for us to kind of keep in mind in that same way is like, okay, when I first started reading books, for example, right? And, there's everything in between, right? I'm a guy that like, I'll read textbooks. Like, again, I read more textbooks outside of college than I ever did inside of college. And also too, I found them more applicable, or I'm going to certain chapters and I'm digesting these things and then coming and testing it with our athletes and then figuring out what actually gets results and all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But then also specifically now when I read, it's a lot different than how I used to read too. Cause like you have like a base level of knowledge that you go and consume information, but then also too, as you get so many years in and actual, seeing results with athletes and what works and can be detrimental or, perspectives on the same exact science, right? We like, yes, this is the science, this is the data behind it, this is what has been seen in the space, but also too, there's context to all this, even peer reviewed, guys that are doing cutting edge peer reviewed studies, they're constantly finding different angles of how they're like, yeah, but then they're like adding context. And then there's 10 studies that disagree with this one study and they're all peer reviewed. And so you can say, oh, we got, there's 9 studies out here that say this, this, and this, but then there's like 40 studies that might come out and say that they counter or add some context within that same thing. So as a coach, what I think is along with it, instead of selling this idea that, oh, let me just take these shortcuts, I'm going to go read this information and like this will be the only thing I need to consume and it's all in one place, is I don't think there's ever going to be one thing that you can consume all in one place, especially because you need to go and like practically work with a bunch of athletes. Like you need to work with hundreds of athletes so that you can kind of get that underneath your belt. And I would say that becomes kind of hard at the college level or high school level or other things because you just don't have that many athletes. And so to have that many athletes, you would need to coach for a large number of years to ever even get around that many athletes, where we have a privilege, obviously in a private facility or a private setting where we have a plethora of athletes that have come through our facility and we get to see all different age groups. That's another thing. Sometimes, let's say if you're only a college coach and you've only ever been a college coach, well, then you only have a perspective of what to do with college athletes, right? But if you train 10-year-olds all the way up to big leaguers, right? All stars, like not even just big leaguers, but like all stars, like guys that could potentially be Hall of Famers. That's a very different dynamic because in different stages of development, we're going to focus on different things. And so, and if you've only coached youth athletes and you think, oh, I can take that same model and I can bring it all the way to the big leagues, sometimes that one is a little easier to see and go, that might not work as much. But also we need to work backwards. What I would do with a big leaguer, I might not necessarily do with a 10-year-old, right? And again, they're at different stages in their development. One of the things, you and I constantly do with athletes is, for example, like a youth athlete, a lot of times they need more reps and they need to generally just be stronger. There's some general low-hanging fruit stuff. Now, we are mindful though, and we always like to add this context because a lot of people will say that, right? Like, oh yeah, so like, let's just get stronger. Let me just get them reps. But you also don't want to be building bad habits in the process. And that also means in the weight room as well, not just, from that. And obviously that's a big area that you've taken on now. But again, a big part of my career was training a lot of youth and young athletes. And we get that question all the time, right? And it's like, okay, but you guys only work with these like really high level athletes. And it's like, no, we work all the way down, 10-year-olds all the way up. Our median age probably in here is probably like 12, 13, 14.
It's like closer to 14.
Yeah, 13, 14. Yeah, depending on, also seasonality year over year, X, Y, and Z. Some of our athletes get older and stay with us and X, Y, and Z. But I was going to have you kind of like touch on that, since now that you've had the opportunity to train these athletes at different stages and that process. What are some things, specifically too that, for coaches that are at the youth level, maybe some takeaways or some things that you've gone through of like applying some of the things that we're doing, but also into that youth setting?
Yeah. Well, I think context, first of all, like kind of going back to your point with like a book, is anybody try to write a book, a paragraph, a sentence, make a 30-second, 60-second, 90-second social media post. Good luck trying to get everything that you have out in any of that. Like, again, you have a whole life's worth of wisdom and you want to make it in a 200-page book or however many pages, right? It's like, there's no way. And then also too, just in that season, like you said, like the way I was interpreting that information and how I wrote it, may have been different. And now I look back at it, I'm like, maybe that came off a little this way when it could have meant that way, and so on and so forth. And so like when it comes to books or, coaching or anything like that, I think context is super, super important. I think everybody just sees stuff and judges a book by its cover, which we're all told not to do at a young age. But I think, first and foremost is, again, just having curiosity and trying to understand, in what context is this being used. And then also too, as somebody who's giving off information and like, a mentor or a coach or a writer, right, is also not dealing too much with absolutes, because also too, like, yes, while this may have been extremely important for you, you may not know all of the other things that maybe you were doing unconsciously or somebody taught you before that point that allowed you to think that this was what the breakthrough was, And so I just think context is super important. And then also too, kind of going with like your youth, or like younger population is, we had a pro guy in here recently and we were talking about, the trickle down effect from the highest level all the way down to like the youth level. And, is basically, we're talking about just context, right? It's like, we were talking particularly about people like pimping home runs, and they're like, you don't need, like, some kid pimped a home run, hit off the wall, ended up being a single, and we're talking about it. And we're just basically like, hey, dude, that could have been a double, right? It's like, but you're over here bat flipping and so on and so forth. But then you watch a big leaguer do it and you're like, well, you want to be like a big leaguer. But then you don't realize, like, well, Tatis has had 1 million at bats in his lifetime. Like, he knows what a ball off the bat, that's going to be a home run feels like. You've taken 400 at bats or whatever. Like, you just don't have enough reps to know the difference between a no doubter and a ball that's a little short sometimes.
And some grace. There's a whole highlight reel of Josh Donaldson pimping balls off the wall that never left the yard. So again, on the other side of that too, I think that's the other thing is sometimes, because it never gets posted on social media and MLB obviously doesn't market it really heavy, is like, big league. I mean, I've seen terrible innings in the MLB. I mean, the guy's making crazy errors, mental mistake after mental mistake. I mean, we just saw the Yankees melt down, RIP to our season last year, right? Is like, again, like they had a terrible inning on some basic plays that, again, the context of the situation, momentum, all these other things that go into practicality. It's like, I think also, and a lot of times like with that, right, it's like, again, when a kid does it, for some reason, we have this thing of like, we feel like we need to go and like, these other things, when in reality, like when Again, like when another athlete, does it at a higher level too, it's like, there's different, like it's a grown man. So we feel like we're not going to crack down as much. But yeah, that's also a whole nother topic of things of like where coaches but it ties in with this one is like what coaches are focused on as I see is such a major difference in high quality, not even just coaching. I would even say like within business, very direct correlations. There's a lot of things that can have your attention. You can spend your time on a lot of different things. Where you focus your time, your development, your energy, your whatever, right? Like there's endless amount of things, but like some things have much bigger returns than other things. In business, like there's a bunch of things I can do that can have really small returns. But then there's also major things. And it doesn't mean you should ignore either one, but it's like figuring out, and that's the wisdom of it, of like figuring out where I should focus my attention and when. Because in different parts of the seasons or different levels of development, different things are important. Like there's, for example, at a youth age, I think that much more coaches should spend much more time on character development, right? And helping them, the motivation and learning all these things, rather than so much about let's talk about all these movements and let's do all these other things, right? And if anything, you should be putting them in environments that are like really athletic, letting their body do some of those other just solve problems and like play and like more play. But in large, a lot of times, there's a lot of coaches that spend a lot of time on like criticizing. And when I say character development, I know someone's jumping on here going like, yeah, these kids today, they don't know how to work hard. No, it's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking more so about like, again, how they deal with adversity and more so how to respond more than anything rather than telling them everything they're doing wrong. Because again, they're kids, like they're going to be doing things wrong. Yeah. Right. Like, again, they don't know that play. They don't know, again, they were in a yes, you practice it all week and X, Y. Yeah. But like you're an adult, right? Like again, when they're 10 years from now, they'll know how to do that, right? Again, they're gonna practice things. They're gonna fail it. You're gonna give them a bunch of instructions. You're gonna feel like you're wasting your time. You're gonna feel like you're talking to a wall half the time. Again, I haven't been a parent, but I assume it would be very similar because I feel like, again, on the same side of that, I've had thousands and thousands of players and in youth. Like I actually have gotten a unique perspective of how a whole bunch of different parents parent and also to how different kids respond in different ways and how we deal with some of those different things and what the kids need in certain levels of development there. But I just think that more so than anything, specifically because a lot of youth coaches don't have a background in developing athletes, or that's not their specialty. They're an accountant or they're, a banker or they're whatever. They work, that you do your normal job every single day. And then you're going to this area and you're just trying to help the players. Like, in reality, I think we start stepping outside of our lane a lot more and trying to do things that like you really don't necessarily need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And I think too, kind of like piggybacking off that is, that's how that conversation went, was basically just a trickle down effect from, older college pro level down. And then again too, just understanding the context in which all these things happen, like I said. But, when it comes to a lot of like the younger hitters, again, like I'm not all knowing by any means, but where anecdotally I've seen a lot of success with them is when you say character development is like learning how to fail. And so again, like when you do go 0 for 3, what's your response? Like when you do your first tournament of the year, only get one hit because it's the first time seeing live pitching in 3 months. Like, do you panic? Do you freak out? And if you do, like, hey, let's talk about it, right? Like, what is the next step? Or is it to just abandon everything, throw in the white flag and just be like, well, nothing worked, right? And so when when you say character development, that's kind of where my brain goes, is like, when you go up there and you are facing a kid that's really good, right? Like, do you just go up there and take everything? Or if an umpire's calling bad pitches or bad calls, like, do you just, again, wave the white flag, or do you figure out how to hit it, right? And then to like resiliency, being persistent, how to handle failure, all those things when it comes. And then also too, from like a physical standpoint, like you said, just solving problems, being athletic. Like, okay, umpire's calling outside. Okay, like, can you hit it? I like literally last night, I think you were here at this point, I had a freshman high school hitter, and I had the machine off angle, so opposite field angle, painted on the white chalk line. and I had him swinging a short bat, and he watched the first one. And he looks at me. It was like, bro, I can't hit that. And then literally by the end of the round, he's like peppering balls in the top right corner of the cage. I was like, I thought you couldn't hit that. And he was like, whoa.
I didn't know how to
he
hit
was
that
like,
as
not
a
how I was
layman.
trying to do it. And I was like, exactly. Like, like again, you know, and I've been using this, like the toolbox analogy. It's like, well, yeah, you're just using the wrong tool, right? It's like, if you got a nail and a hammer, you grab the tape measure. It's like, grab the hammer. You know, it's like, you're over here trying to pull this ball for a 400-foot bomb when this ball's painted on the outside, you know, chalk line, and you know he's going to throw it there because guess what? The umpire's been calling it all day. Every pitcher in high school baseball, you go ask any of our high schoolers, hey, what's the first pitch that you usually see? Outside fastball. Like, it's not news to anybody. Everybody knows it's happening, and the umpires aren't great. So again, like how you were trying to, I agree, very, very tough to hit, if hittable at all, the way you were trying to. But that's why too we train. Or I train with them on different ways to be athletic and to solve problems. And again, through drills and cues and thoughts and box adjustments, a lot of different ways. But, you know, more than anything, like with them, again, too, same with the freshmen, is like, how do you handle failure? Like, you think you're going to go into high school your first year and bat 1,000? You know, like probably not. You know, you're going to go up there, you're growing, the mounds went back, the fields got bigger. You know, if you are fortunate and good enough to play varsity baseball, it's probably the best pitching you've ever seen in your life. It's like, you're probably not going to be super successful as a freshman, you know, at any level, right? And if you are, great. There's going to be hurdles along the way, though. And so, again, those skills come into play. And, you know, having a plan to respond with, you know, whether it be looking at video or, you know, I've recently had them all try journaling, right? And I know it's not going to stick for a lot of them, but, you know, hey, like if something's not working, write it down so you can remember. Like if something is working, write it down, right? Maybe we look at video and that could be a skill that works. Maybe it's talking to a peer, right? Like, hey, you know, you're a senior and you currently play on varsity right now. So like, what really helped you when you struggle with this? Like sometimes it's just talking to each other, right? And so, you know, different skills like that, I think reinforcing and promoting those skills has kind of been like the biggest. Again, I know everybody wants it to be black and white. Like, well, if you just do this drill, this will help every 10-year-old. I'm like, no, I've done so many different things with 10-year-olds that none of them stuck. Sometimes it's just keeping them interested, you know, like if you've ever coached a 10-year-old, right? And letting them have fun. And like, you know, some of them come from, you know, they are homeschooled, you know, different situation. They're homeschooled and the only time they get to see friends is here. And so like, again,
those are social hours.
Letting them socialize a little bit, but also how do you get work? Like it's just a dynamic environment. And then, you know, but those skills kind of transfer to life outside of baseball, which I think, you know, is even more important than trying to figure out how to make them, you know, a 500 hitter, I guess.
Well, and that's where I was going to say too. One of the things we always get asked all the time, it's like, okay, I agree. All those things are important. We agree X, Y, and Z. Okay, how do I go about like training some of those things, right? And like you listed a bunch of things, but I think one of the number one things that coaches need to flash the flashlight on is themselves, right? Which is like modeling. Like when the athlete is younger, like you're competing too. And they're seeing you compete in front of them, right? You're the coach and you're competing with another organization or doing, you know, this or that, right? And things are not going your way and sometimes you're losing, and how you're modeling how you respond to resiliency, how you respond to setbacks, how you respond to all those other things is also giving them great insight in how they are as a team. And that goes all the way up, even at the college level and other things, right? Like your heartbeat and where your heart condition is going to largely impact your team's dynamics and how they respond because you're their leader. So like also on the other side of that, right, too, as well, if, you know, I remember, for example, I'm in college, if I'm booting a ball and my coach is losing his mind in the dugout, right? If I'm already struggling, first off, I already have my own predispositions and I already struggle with performance anxieties and I already do all these other things too. And then now you're freaking out in the dugout and you're making it such a big deal, rather than a lot of times, you know, for example, one big thing when I was coaching on the field is I would use the word or the words, so what, all the time. And then I would say, so a kid would boot a ball, right? A kid would boot a ball and I'd be like, so what, play the game. You know, and I just would say that all the time, like, so what, play the game. Like, so what? Play the game. Like, and the reason I could say those words is we had a lot of conversations in practice about what that actually meant, right? It wasn't like, man, you should sit here. Like it doesn't matter, right? I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm also not saying that like you're a terrible player or any of these other things, right? It's just at the end of the day, like we're going into competition knowing we're going to make mistakes. Like you're going to go throughout life. You don't wake up this morning and go, I'm going to be 100% perfect today and I'm not going to do anything wrong and everything's going to be magical. And if you are trying to do that, I'm sure you're, having some tough days, right? And in reality, I would tell that to athletes is as a reset in their head is just like, okay, like I made a mistake and we made an error. Now I have to play the game, right? At the end of the day, this is the situation. Right now, there's a guy on first base. We're only up by 1. The next guy's probably going to bunt. Right? I need to move on. I need to move on and learn and then compete. And so, as a coach, I had to tell myself, "So what? Play the game." Right? Because me sitting here and hammering the shortstop that makes 98% of every damn play that goes over to his side, and he's one of the most elite shortstops in the league, and he boots a ball in a key situation. He doesn't need to be told that he sucks right now, right? And all these other things and with it. So a lot of times it's more like, like I had his back and more getting the whole team to, instead of them starting to point fingers and everybody starts to, because when you start blame shifting or, all those other things, in reality, it's just like, no. Like, so what? I don't care if he made an error. I don't care if you made an error. I don't care if he made an error. Like, so what? Play the game. We'll get more reps in and we'll try to get better at this overall. And, in life, the same thing is like, okay, hey, like I wouldn't have chose it, right? But this is the situation that I'm in. And at the end of the day, I have choices that I may have made that got me in this situation, but I can't change those choices. So this is where we're currently at. And what I can do is make choices from this point forward, no matter where I am in my life. And then obviously too, the other thing with that, right, too, as well, is like philosophically, I think as that became so much more true to me too, is obviously as I built my relationship more with God, is that so what becomes a lot easier because it's like, well, I have a deeper trust in him. Like I have a deeper trust in whatever's happening is going to grow me. Right. Like, so what? I booted a ground ball and I lost the championship game in high school or whatever. Right. And the moment, yes, it's so easy to be like, I'm the worst. I lost it for the whole team. It's so easy for my teammates, if I have bad teammates, to position it and point it towards me. But also in reality too, like, this will also be for my benefit. Most often than not, facing adversity earlier on is much more beneficial for you to do. And we were talking about this on a recent pod that we did with Matt, was like the same exact thing. Is it's like, hey, like a lot of these athletes that don't face adversity or human beings that don't face adversity early on in their life, and they have to learn those skills at a much later time, is a lot more detrimental, right? And it also too, sometimes much more costly, much more later on, where when you're a youth, they expect you to make mistakes. They expect you to make bad choices. They expect you to have setbacks. People expect you to just be a kid. In a lot of ways, there's a lot more grace and love, but as you're making these decisions for your business or your family or X, Y, and Z, like, now there could be some, skill sets that we can access later on. And, any case, I think that, more than anything there is like the practicality of this is go, hey, you want to make your players better at some of these skill sets that we're talking about, from like what I should be doing from like a youth age group or all the way up to working with major league athletes, is modeling is huge. And what I mean by modeling too is not trying to act the part, but like working on yourself where your resiliency is growing, your mindset is growing, your ability to, again, be calm. And again, you're going to therapy, you're working on yourself, you're meeting with mentors, you're going in fellowship groups, you're doing all these things, you're learning more things, you're reading more books, you're modeling also for your athlete what it looks like when you want to remember for them. And again, guilty is charged too, and some of these things too as well. It's like, you're telling the athlete to write the things down, but you're not writing it down about the athlete. So you're not modeling that you find it important, right? You're telling them that they should be important to them, but then you're not modeling it yourself, right? So that's also things, and again, like guilty is charged on some of those things where I'm like, there's been times in my life where I'm like a really big note taker, And then there's been times in my life where I've gotten a little away in certain ways. And there's also a time and a place, right? I can also consume information differently now than I could when at one point I was like, I can get overwhelmed really easy. And it was very easy not to be able to do these things, where I have a skill set now where I can have, as you guys, see me do, is like, I could have 15 projects going on, and then all I need is but even now, when I feel like at any point, when I start feeling, when I'm aware that I'm losing track or I'm doing whatever, I'll go sit down. I'll do a to-do list. I'll write it out on my iPad. I have it in my office. I go back and I reference those things. I have emails that are already notated on these things. I send text messages to myself. I pin text messages at the top of my messages so I can make sure I get things done. That's another form of note taking, or again, having things lined up for some of these other things. So I think that's also another piece with that is largely more than anything is like, okay, what can I do for my players? Well, the best thing you can do for your players, and if you want to get them better, is you get better, and you become better at all these same exact skill sets that you want them to model.
Yeah, get better and get to know them as humans, actually understanding them as humans first and not just a baseball or softball player first and foremost has been, again, a huge unlock, as some people would say. It's just like, like you have a relationship with them, and like they trust you, right? It's like they're trusting you with their career, their swing right now, right? And again too, like as I get older, right, and I can zoom out a little bit more, and I'm like, okay, well, like those 100 at bats didn't really matter, but when I was in those 100 at bats, at that point in my career, that's all that mattered to me, right? And so like perspective wise, I'm like, well, like my baseball career or whatever, like I learned a lot. I can zoom out now. But when I was in it, like that was what was most important to me, because that's all I knew. I didn't have, a dog. I never had a job or anything like that outside of just like, and so again, like that is my world. So when I did fail in those 100 at bats and I batted 200, like that was everything. And so again, like when I zoomed out and I was able to look at that and then zoom back in and be like, well, if this is everything to this athlete, because that's all they know, right? They don't have a job. They, play baseball on the weekends. They practice baseball during the week or softball, right? Like they're trusting me with a very big part of their life, essentially, And so again, like getting to know them as humans has been, also top priority to me, in my opinion, as a coach. And then too, as for like the getting to know yourself better, or working on yourself too, is didn't tell you guys this, but over the weekend almost had another tire go down. And so, a long story short, my
brother did have a tire go down yesterday. Yesterday
crazy.
He got a flat tire.
And so, long story short, I like move into a new apartment, tire pops, like literally like second week or something like that. And so like I lost a tire, I had to buy a new one. They're not cheap tires. This weekend tire pressure is low, and I'm like, I really hope it's cold. I was hoping Vegas is cold. And then, go and they find a screw and they're like, actually, like this one's repairable. So it ended up not costing me anything. But again, my human response immediately was like, look at the bank account, look at future bills. Oh no, what, $500 for a new tire. Yeah, I know, steep. I thought so too. It's like $500 for a new tire is like, we gonna need, Naomi to chauffeur me around. And then so my first instinct, and then it was like an hour later, and I talked to my dad, and my dad was just like, you're miserable to talk to right now. I'm gonna go to bed. And I was like, wanting to complain. Yeah. And then like an hour later, I start listening to worship music. I pray about it. And then, God gives me the perspective. It's like, well, you have been putting a little money aside here and there. And it's like, well, yeah, God, but that's all the money I put aside. And he was like, well, last time you lost a tire, you don't have no money put aside. So it's like, you could be there again. And I was like, oh, okay. Like that's, good perspective to have, and like a good conversation. And then I woke up the next morning, was like, you know what? I have money for a tire. Like I could, like it's all good. Right. And then go and they're like, yeah, $0. So I could just patch it up, got me in, got me out, whatever. And I was like, I spent like a whole hour wanting to complain about it. How my dad was like, yeah, you're miserable to talk to. Like, I'm not, whatever, go to bed, And so it was just funny. Cause like from a like work on yourself side of things, like again, these kids, like they're not paying for their tires, their parents are or whatever, right? But when they go 0 for 3, that's them losing a tire, right? And they're like, I just spent 4 hours in the last 2 days lifting and hitting and I put in all this time and this effort, and then just to go 0 for 3, right? And so like that's how they feel, And so again, to like from my perspective, just like what you just said, is like, you know, me historically spending multiple days, you know, wanting to complain about it or woe is me or whatever. Only having an hour was a big W for me. But then 2 is like literally what you just said. Well, now also I can use that with context with my hitters. Like, yeah, like it's okay to be pissed that you went 0 for 3. Like don't be happy. You're jumping for joy because you went 0 for 3 with 3 Ks. I think you're a little nuts. Like, what's wrong with you? But, you know, also too, like have your time to be mad about it. And then let's, you know, to solve the problem, right? Like what was happening? Like, you know, maybe it really wasn't like, maybe it's your first time seeing live pitching in 3 months and like your eyes just need to adjust and you need to get used to seeing live arm rather than a machine, or, you know, you were outdoors and there was no batter's eye and it was just tough to pick up. Like there's going to be a lot of things, right? And you just give yourself time to adjust and like, we'll talk about it. We'll solve that problem. Maybe your swing did suck and we need to talk about it. And it's like, maybe we need to change something, right? And so, you know, those skills and practicing them yourself, again, can give a lot of context, again, at least my perspective, anecdotally, again, where it's like, well, I've taken that experience in my life literally over the weekend. And then, you know, I had multiple hitters come in, first games that they played since November, right? And they're all like, I struggled. I went 0 for 2 with a strikeout and a pop-up, and I rolled over and I struck out, and, you know, I walked and, you know, then popped one up. It's like, again, like everybody that's ever coached or played baseball or softball knows like your first at-bats after a winter typically don't go super well. Pitchers usually but
I've also old man long enough coached where I've had guys go blazing hot out the beginning and they're like 4 for 4, 3 doubles. Oh, dude, I feel amazing. I'm like, all right, well, we'll see how you feel in 3 weeks. You know, like it's coming. Maybe you started hot. I tell our players all the time, look, sometimes you're going to start hot and then finish cold. Sometimes you're going to start cold, finish hot. Sometimes you're going to be pretty similar the whole year. Yeah. And then sometimes you're just going to get hot at certain points in the year. You got hot, you got cold, you got hot, you got cold, you got okay, you're okay, you're okay, you're cold, you're hot, you're good. It's like, you know, like all of those things are going to happen as well. And your story is your story, your journey is your journey. But also one of the other things I was going to bring up too is like, you know, again, another thing is just like, for example, if you're trying to get athletes not to be so wrapped up in their performance, but you're a coach that's wrapped up in their performance, you're modeling that also for them too as well. If your identity is in their performance, then you're modeling to them that their identity also should be focused on their performance. And so I think that that's also another thing too as well, is like where if I can talk to them and have that more of that perspective of, hey, like, I can't tell you how good it is for players where when they go 0 for 3 that you don't treat them any different than if they went 3 for 3. Like, again, like I'm not going to, you know, dog you. I'm not going to immediately you make an error and pulling you out the game. Yeah. I'm not going to, you know, like all these other things, because again, like you're creating a monster and then you're like, oh, well, that guy's just not a good player. It's like, no, like how you're coaching them really does matter, and showing confidence in those other things. And there's a time and place for everything. I'm not saying that there isn't a time and place to bench a guy, because that's also a good thing too. That's also feedback. Some guys need to get benched. Some guys aren't benched. Bad coaching is they won't bench the guy and they need to bench the guy, right? So that's also part of it too. Like they could be the best player on your team, but again, he's being a terrible teammate, and also too, he might be making the rest of the team play terrible because, you know, this guy needs to get benched, and your whole team will play better. You'll win more ball games without your freaking most talented player, playing or being, you know, even if you lose a couple games, it might be better even to see, you know, for those things. There's, again, time and place for everything. But I also think on the other side of that is, you know, for athletes is more often than anything, as you mentioned, is like, I was almost saying like, when you brought up the point where you're talking specifically about getting to know them, but also the other part with this too, which is like, hey, like, I don't value you based on, you know, if you're my best player or if you're my worst player, right? If you're the most athletic compared to the most athletic guy in the facility, you know, also on the, you know, on the other side of that, like, yeah, are you going to have different privileges that other guys that don't have? Are you going to have the different opportunities that other people might not have? Like, for sure. But I'm talking about from a foundational standpoint of, yes, like, for example, if you're the best player on the team, you're going to get some advantages that other people don't have. Like you might be able to show up a little bit this time or that time. You might be able to get away with some things that other players that are on the edge already. The same thing happens at work. I hate when people say this all the time, like, well, you should treat every player the exact same. That's not what I'm saying here. Cause I'm telling you right now, if you're the draft pick on the team and nobody else is the draft pick on the team, and the same thing happens in business. If that sales guy is bringing in a crazy amount of money and the other guy who's not bringing in no money and he's also like on the fringe and then he's also being an asshole. Like most guys could, like we talked about this before when we talked about like Michael Jordan. It's like, yo, if the guy wasn't that good, he can't act like Michael Jordan. But because he is Michael Jordan, he can get away with things that other guys can't get away with. He could talk to athletes. He can talk to his teammates in different ways.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't necessarily make everything right? Just because you're with it. I'm not saying that either. But what I'm saying is from the other side of that is like, yo, life is coming and it's going to be the same way in business. So, or, same way when they're an employee at a work site, like, guess what? If you're at the lowest tier of that business and you're, again, an entry-level employee and you're making minimum wage and doing whatever, you can't get away with the same things the COO of that company can get away with, where he might show up 20 minutes late and it's okay, where you show up 20 minutes late and you're fired.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because again, they can get somebody else that can replace you and take on that role very easily. So on the other end of that, like this is real world. On the other side of that is like, I'm talking more so about, while there is repercussions for the actions and the things that we do, and they might be different based on different individuals, what I'm talking about more so is like my value for you as a human being, which are different things. Right. So from that other side of that, of like being, value as a human being, is going like, okay, if you go 0 for 3, it doesn't mean that you're going to start next game, but I'm also not going to start treating you like shit because, you went 0 for 3,
yeah.
Right? Again, like at the end of the day, I'm still here for you. But again, like I love my mom. She doesn't work for my business. Like I love my family. They're not going in my starting 9, right? Like again, they can have love and value for people, and then also be able to see those things of being like, who's the best for this role right now within the team settings, within all of those other things, and all of that be real as well. And so I think the context with all of that and putting that together, and then also like the reason pulling that back into our original conversation is like, again, you like read a book and you know what, I might take at this point when it comes into like skill acquisition or training athletes or doing whatever, when I first started reading a book, maybe I took away like 50%, like, oh man, it was like really impactful to me or doing whatever. Now, certain times, like I read a book and I take like, a couple things, right? Like there might be a couple things that I take. Some things just reaffirm other things I already thought. And then some things I thought in the book weren't super valuable, or I thought they were missing some context or, whatever. Maybe it plants a seed and then waters later. And I'm like, okay, I more agree with that now than I did before. But, again, the more information you consume, the more you realize that again, and the more vetted you are down a path, you have like a filtering process where you start getting better ideas of what works and what doesn't and what context needs to be added. And the more skilled you are as a practitioner, you can filter better than others. Again, not everything coming through the filter is good, and not everything that is getting filtered is bad, right? Sometimes, again, I'm just not open to that concept at the moment. And later on, I might let that through my filter, right? My filter has been updated. So I think your filter should always be getting upgraded and worked on, and your perspective and like all those other things. But yeah, there's plenty of books that are out there that are even like that sell well, that, that do all these other things that, for a certain audience, it's great. For example, let's go to saying like, David Goggins, right? Is David Goggins' books are going to sell phenomenal, right? There's business guys that are going to make business books that are amazing, right? Is there value inside of those books? Like for sure, right? Should everybody, if somebody's if their life's not where they want it to be, and also too, they're struggling with depression and they're struggling with these real world issues that they're having inside their life. They're struggling with performance anxieties. They're struggling with all these reasons why they're not where they want to be, X, Y, and Z. Is that David Goggins' book going to be the thing that necessarily, like, it could be, but also
Maybe.
also in reality too, on the other side of that, there's a lot more. There's a lot more to everybody. If anything, it gives you insight into who David Goggins is and how he thinks, right? How he processes things, how him and his editor and everybody else that had input on that book, again, created this as well. Because I've seen a lot of people write books and then you go and this is what they say, but then you watch what they do and they also model other things. They have context that's not written on the pages. And so you can do that, Gary Vee. You can do that with, Brecca. You can do that. I can name a billion different people. Hermosi or something like that, right? So there's things like that as well as having that idea that, again, not everything is gospel. I got to take bits and pieces of this, understand everything needs context, and not just, take David Goggins' book and go, this is how I'm going to live my life. I'm going to do exactly this. And it's like, well, just because you do that, first off, that's not even David Goggins and holistically. And even if you did that worked for David Goggins based on, all these other things. Like it might be a massive compensation that he's made. And again, it's worked out to be functional in his life at the moment, right? Where there's also a lot of people that I can write you a book on a Ponzi scheme and it might work for a little while, right? And then at some point, all of a sudden my whole business comes crashing down. It's like, again, like just because things also work for Band-Aids or things for a certain period of time doesn't mean that that's always going to be the solution either. So I think that's also, some things for, context when we're reading, filtering, podcast, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think even too, if you like read or listen to David Goggins talk, like a lot of them are obviously they're about his life, right?
Yeah.
And then also too, it's him speaking on a time in his life where he needed inspiration to make a change in his life because he looked in the mirror and didn't like what he saw, right? And multiple times.
Yeah.
And then also to give context, David Goggins, pretty sure he lives here. I've driven by him running multiple times. And every time I've driven by him, he's not yelling into a camera, you got to get up. No, he's running by himself. Yeah. And so again, like there's also the side of things like when you hear the book and you read the book, you listen to the social media stuff that you see from him. But also like I can tell you from my personal experience, I drove by him not long ago running and like he's just running in silence by himself. Nobody out there, no video, no phone. Just running, not screaming at nobody, And so again, like, you see what you see, but also that's not everything. Right. And then also like that book could be a very good book for you at a point in your life to give you some inspiration, some motivation maybe. Right. Sure. Or like, I liked in church, they're talking about, it's like, should you wait till January 1st to start a New Year's resolution? And then like, they actually brought, like a psychologist and, like a doctor in, to like help, give this message. And they're like, I mean, if that's the motivation you need is a culturally like driven idea that you need to start on the
like
first
chapter,
right? And like, that's what you need is motivation. I think that's great. Use the motivation to get started, but there's no scientific evidence that starting on January 1st gives you better chance to make a difference than last year in August or whatever, right? And so, and they were talking about that. And so again, too, it's like, it doesn't mean that, the book, or, I'll even just use the Bible in instance, like, when people ask what my favorite verse is, like, well, it just depends. Like right now it's whatever. 3 years ago, it was this, right? And so it's also like, in what point in my life and what context did I hear that verse? And then also too, like maybe I didn't, when I heard the verse, it was whatever. Then I was reading and I read the context around the verse and I'm like, man, I really like that verse now because now I got context, right? And so, it's all
your life. You've experienced something, and then all of a sudden that verse means something different to you.
Yeah, it means something different because of my experiences, or again, my interpretation of the story now, or whatever. All these different things, and so when it goes to reading these books too, I think, and then to taking that information again, it's perspective, it's context, it's timeliness, it's how, when, why, for who, with all this information as well. And so kind of going back to the original point, it's like, not every book is gospel. Like a lot of like really good, textbooks that I read, back when I was in college while doing this, like they referred to other articles saying like, hey, if you want more information or you want, exact numbers, like this is where I pulled the information from in this article. Like they're even pointing externally
I was going to say, maybe something for us to clarify is just the term. when people say this isn't gospel, I think it's also a misinterpretation of what the gospel is, right? Which is one of the reason I was saying that is like, for example, the Bible isn't made to be read word by word and go, I'm going to do this exact thing that's said in this verse, right? And what I mean, and that this might be shocking to somebody, be like, what do you mean? You're talking about the Bible. It's like, yeah. So for example, if someone does this, you should take them in the street and stone them. Okay, well, hold on. No, this was describing what was happening at the moment, what was happening at the time. And it's also like a history book. When you read a history book, do you read the history and go, oh, I'm going to go do this exact action that was happening in this exact moment in time? It's like, no. It's giving you context. It's giving you perspective. So even when we say this isn't gospel, even in the Gospels, you need context.
Yeah.
Even in the Gospels, you have to take it where this is the word of God. But at the same time, this is history, right? That has happened throughout time and where God was within the story, not necessarily what was said in this one verse is exactly what I should do and I should remove it from everything else. And this is what it says here. It says here, I need to do this, right? And it's like, without context, like, dude, you're reading, you know, you're reading like the last page in the book there, and you ain't, you know, you're in, you need to realize that again, like, you know, again, even the feel goods, if you don't have the Old Testament, if you don't have the other things to reference, you're missing pieces of the story that are very contextual. So it does, even in the gospel in that way, is that everything should be taken within context and filtered, and also be willing to, again, there's a human being writing it, right? So if there's a human being writing it, we're all flawed, and we also can't see everything holistically. I love, just like there's tens of thousands of books, or just like people have written books 5 years ago, and they're like, yeah, but we also have, there's different versions of textbooks every year where illustrations get updated, that words get changed, that other things get, you know, also too, we had a biomechanics book that came out 20 years ago, and then or 50 years ago, and then they have a new one that came out 3 years ago, and it might originally came out 4 years ago, and this is the 4th edition, right? So there's all of these things in between of like updates, and understanding that is like, if you're continued in your growth and understanding. I wanted to note, when you said earlier, you talked about how, okay, you know, well, maybe it's your first at-bats of the season, or maybe, you know, there's these other things that are going on, or maybe, again, or just maybe if we get the mindset too of just being like, hey, it's just feedback. Like, dude, go back to work, right? Like, okay, you went 0 for 3. Like, it doesn't mean you should throw it away. Like, oh, it doesn't matter. It also doesn't mean it's the end of the world, right? Or, you know, it's just feedback. It's just going like, I did go 0 for 3. Well, how can I be better next time? Okay, well, when I went into the game, like I showed up late, I started rushing, I went to the plate, I was feeling a whole bunch of anxiety and pressure that I needed to perform, or excellent, whatever, right? And then again, as I go, you know, again, this is just feedback, and what I do with that feedback is obviously one of the areas that we help athletes with, is how to process and maybe make it actionable to go and do something. But if we can change the mindset from, again, it's not about that your performance doesn't matter, and it isn't about like, and again, isn't that it's everything, right? In reality, it's just feedback, right? And so if you want to get better at this is cool, right? Like, it's just feedback. Some days I'm going to go 0 for 3. Okay, well, then we're going to make adjustments, right? We're going to do something different in your training. And that might be just how you're processing. Like, we might be doing a similar drill, but we're just going to talk about it a little bit different. I'm going to hear them. They wanted to work on, let's say they identified in their first performance that like how they were talking to themselves, their self-talk was terrible, right? And they were doing those things. Okay, well, now when I'm in the cage and I overhear you going, oh, you're terrible, I can see the expression on your face, or doing whatever. Well, we're going to talk about it a little bit different than we did before. We're still making adjustments. It's not that we're not taking any feedback from your first performance. They all matter. But at the same time, I'm not living and dying by, you know, your one game today or this weekend or whatever, right? And so I think sometimes parents can get stuck in between. Either it doesn't matter, right? Or you went 0 for this weekend, or you only hit 400 this weekend, son. And so now, you know, again, I'm going to treat you different. The car ride home, all the things, right? Like we're going to have this whole thing, because my identities and other things are getting wrapped up in this, right? And so I think I've also become a much better coach by modeling the opposite, which is not the external, but like, as I've truly believed this in my heart, that their performance has become more just feedback for me rather than my identity as a coach, where they go 0 for 4, they had a bad weekend and now I'm a terrible coach. Oh, all my hitters are hitting, so I'm a good coach. Oh, they're not hitting. Oh, I'm a terrible coach.
Yeah.
Oh, like I don't want to ride the waves like them either, right? So as I can become detached from the result, I'm also helping them learn how to become detached from the result, and not detached where it doesn't matter, but detached as it's just feedback. I can be objective about it. I can see it objectively. And then also too, I can now tweak my process. I can now tweak what we're doing. We can talk about some things that's going to lead to some new discovery. I'm happy you did go play this weekend because it gave us insight. It's like almost like going to therapy, right? You go to therapy, great. You have all these theoretical, you unpack some things, X, Y, and Z, but then I go out in the world and I go play with others, right? And then I come back and I'm like, this week I got on the plane and I started having a whole bunch of, anxiety from, being, I'm in this small space and I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It brings up new things for us to discuss that highlights things that I would have never, I've almost started to forget about it because it hasn't happened in so long, or there hasn't been a perfect scenario that has brought this to our attention. Right. And that this is also God's design, right? Where it's like, all of a sudden this thing is really important in my life, and it's shown up in this way, and it's brought these emotions up. And so now we can talk about it. Right. And I think the same thing as a hitter, right? It's like when we messed around and we talked about like us being swing therapists, right? It's like, again, you come back and you had these issues. Well, it's great because now it gives us an opportunity to discuss these things that maybe before, even if I started talking about it, it wouldn't have, it's that verse you read. And it doesn't really mean much to you right now. But then all of a sudden you're a junior in high school and you're like, I see what Cody was saying. I understand why that was so important. At the time, I didn't feel it was as important, which is why I wasn't note taking, which is why I wasn't prioritizing those reps, which is why I was skipping through my prep work, which was why I was doing all these other things. Yeah. Okay, well, great. You go out in the world and, you have some of these other experiences. Hopefully you have some setbacks. I pray you do, right? Just so that we can come back, and then it gives me an opportunity to actually coach, right? And be able to help you and us to provide some feedback for us to make some adjustments, right? But it's not like, this or that, or overall all of that,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, just naturally, this has been, again, I'm unaware exactly where these teaching moments were in my youth, but I know it was, again, taught to me this way is like, you have like a background in fighting. I haven't really fought much, but it's like when you get punched in the mouth, and then it's almost like as a fighter where you're like some people are like, yeah, now it's a fight. I was just, laying it on you this whole time, and you haven't fought back or whatever. And now it's like, now we're playing the game, or you're playing checkers, you're just dominating your little brother all the time. And then you run into somebody that finally, and then it's like, it piques this interest. We're like, oh, I got to try something different. I got to play more. I got to do that. Right. Or like ping pong with the little kids, like when you beat one of them and then then they go and practice with their buddies for 2 weeks, and then they come back and it's like, I've been practicing. And then they got this new move or whatever, or this new serve. And
force an adaptation.
Yeah. Right. And it's like, same thing with with coaching is like, when you say feedback, it's like, I hope you have those setbacks so that we can talk about it, so that we can learn how to, grow and adapt and make adjustments in that situation, right? Yeah. Almost like, again, just same thing last weekend, lefty hitter. He literally said, I think I faced 2 lefties entirely last year. Last weekend, I faced 3. And he's like, it just was a different angle,
look.
Right?
Yeah.
Different angle, different arm slot. They were all throwing curveballs, breaking away from me. And then too, it's like, we have talked about it. We have worked on it. And so then, again, I go, hey, have we worked on this? Yeah, we worked on it. I was like, okay, so when we did work on it, what really helped you? I kind of forgot. Okay, so now that this is a legitimate problem to you, now again, more willing to take in that information and, let's say, listen. He was listening the whole time, right? I don't believe that he was just ignoring me.
It just wasn't
right.
as
but again, it didn't
impactful.
present itself as a big enough problem for him to prioritize it as much as he could have at the time.
Yeah.
And now, we go through it. Yesterday we worked through it, and he's like, man, that's crazy. He was like, we really did do this for 2 months ago, a lot, huh? And I was like, yeah, we did. And it's like, now when you see this problem, you have a solution for it.
And just like we talk about, okay, I've had a lot of conversations with some of our most especially at this time of the season where we're kind of talking about like, hey, when you see these matchups, like this is a swing you're going to have, right? And we're having more of these conversations right now. But some of the same conversations I'm having with a pro athlete or a high Power 5 Division I athlete comparatively to like, yo, you're 12 years old, right? I don't need to talk about all these crazy angles and, you know, all these other, like that's pretty far down the line that like there's a lot more low hanging fruit stuff for you. And then also too, but that might be low hanging fruit stuff for that athlete that we're actually giving it to. And so if understanding that, again, things are valued at different times and their development and figuring out what that is as an athlete, as you become a more skilled practitioner, then you understand as a coach, right? As you become a more skilled coach, you get better at identifying what this athlete right in front of you needs. And that becomes in a bunch of different ways. Yes, some of it is experience. Some of it was through mentors and them like helping you be aware of something and being like, hey, you know, at this time of the year, I like to do this because I found this, like, you don't need to make the same mistakes I make before they actually happen. And then also to the other part with like, as I've learned more, right, as, you know, again, like let's say, again, I'm going to outside sources. Maybe I'm learning from other coaches or I'm, you know, again, like therapy or, you know, other areas, my faith, other things that have been revealed to me, other things like that. Or also you have another area where it's like, you're also on the side of like, hey, I was thinking about this and I thought this might help our hitters get better. Like, and just in general, right? We just going to go try things and we're going to do things with athletes. And like, all of a sudden, like, man, like that actually opened some things up that we weren't doing before. And maybe you tried it and it sucked and we went away from it really quick or whatever. Right. So there's all of those things in between. But I do think that large with that is like one of the major issues with player development is that we think that it's just player development and the coach gets taken out of it, right? And it's not coach development, right? We think, oh, the only way I'm going to develop my players, I'm going to focus everything on them. When in reality, like, yo, I need to, you know, again, largely if I want to get my players better, I need to get better. And if I get better, I'll be able to develop them, you know, much more rather than like just solely focusing on them. It's like, you can't even see how you could help them better because you're not skilled enough to identify what you're already doing that might be detrimental to them rather than, you know, and especially if you have that approach thinking that all you're doing is getting your players better. It's like, no. Every coach is getting their players better and they're also leading them down paths that might be making them worse or not gaining too much results, right? We're all a percentage right. It's impossible in every situation to have the perfect drill to say the perfect thing with the perfect tone, with the perfect listening environment, with all like there is no perfect. It would be insane. So instead with that, right, it's like we're all working in percentages and we're human beings. And then again, the best coaches, practitioners, X, Y, and Z players for that matter, there is differences, right? Again, about what they're doing and why and modalities or mindsets or techniques or all those other things, right? And so again, at the end of the day, I think focusing on where, you know, we're not only we're focused on how we get the player better, but we're also getting better as coaches so that we can provide them better solutions or have more refined perspectives so that we could better, you know, facilitate or aid that athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think too, as a player, like, and a coach, again, like, if you've ever been a part of a business, ran a business, you know, from an outside looking into a business, like, you know, there's at one point in the business where like you got to wear a lot of different hats, right? You got to do a lot of different roles. And then there's sometimes where you have to delegate because, hey, maybe I was good enough to do this for where we were at as our team, right? Maybe I was a good enough 3-hole for where our team is right now. But then we brought in an All-American 3-hole that drove in all these runs. And it's like, well, maybe I'm a better leadoff now. Maybe I'm a better 2-hole. Maybe I'm better in the 5-hole for what the team needs right now, right? And so same thing as a coach is like, you know, refining these different skills, right? Especially to, you know, where, again, I can help them in all these different ways. But a lot of times, like, you know, I'll even have Tay talk to them about emotional, mental stuff sometimes because, again, she's more versed. She's done that stuff. And then now, does she hit with them every single day and have the context that I have? No. So a lot of times, like when they do that, me and her talk, or I listen to what they say, or I read what they write, and I try to get context so I can like try to connect dots, because I do hit with them every day and she doesn't. But again, sometimes like they need to hear it from her because her perspective is a fresh perspective to them. Or again, I did not go to school for anything psychological. I took a behavior change class and a sports psych class, but two, right? And then I think just like a basic, psychology of like human development or whatever. But again,
So
like,
you're an expert.
Basically. But again, like, total of like, again, 8 credit hours. And that, so again, like, while I've learned some skills from other people, like, again, she's way more versed in that information than I am, where it's like, again, in-house, but I outsource it again, essentially to somebody else. Right. Or there'll be some times where, again, we both do this. It's like, hey, in different seasons, right? There's some times where you threw me to the wolves and are like, hey, like you got to fail a little bit to learn as a coach. But then there's some times where it's like, hey, like, what are you seeing? Like, I've tried everything. I've thrown the kitchen sink at this kid. I swear I have. Like, what do you see? And then it's like, again, you outsource, you get a different set of eyes, right? Or maybe there were times where, again, we would ask athletes to consider doing strength training with other people at one point, because we didn't have the resources. We didn't have, things in place to do that. And we knew that this would be largely beneficial to their career and to their swing and all this stuff. And we trusted that resource, but then we got in a position where like we could handle some of that. And so we did,
Gym,
and so again, same thing as a coach, right?
Got
It's
better
like
as coaches.
we're learning how to build these different skills so we can better help them in all these different ways.
Yeah.
But also too, there's time to outsource things as well. Like, maybe you do need, right? And this would probably shock a lot of people. It's like with a lot of our hitters, we openly ask them sometimes to go seek help in other aspects, like go to therapy, go to a mental performance coach, go to a strength coach,
go to another hitting coach. We've outsourced.
that.
We source them. Like there's certain hitting coaches that are really skilled in a certain area. Maybe it's like about, we've sent certain athletes where like we wanted them to really work on like not just approach, but more so like a mentality at the plate. And and again, this is the thing. Even a guy that is good at teaching mentality, right? What I'm going to say is the other way. They have a style themselves, right? So they're teaching them what kind of also worked for them or what they've seen from their other experiences. There's other coaches that also teach different mentalities at the plate that I think might be better for a certain athlete to hear from that perspective, because I preach different mentalities. There's times and a place where I'm telling athletes like, hey, we're smashing softballs, we're smashing baseballs, we're doing all these other things. And then there's a time and a place I'm like, hey, this ain't your A swing. Like, this ain't your A swing. Like we're hitting here, right? We're hitting here and we're going to do these other things. And so different athletes need at different times. Like, again, we shout out to our a girl Campbell Cole. But like having that same thing, like there's a time that we'll tell us like, yo, like it's really helps her to stay really aggressive. Right. And then certain athletes, like all they're trying to do is they're doing everything at 1,000%. Every swing they take is and they're just trying to hit pull side nukes every single time. And he's top spinning balls for a line drive to the left field. And that's something that we take in mind too, as we calculate, we contemplate some of this other stuff. So there's people need to hear different things at different times. And it's not just, if this happens, just do this. This happens, just do that. Again, it is a really high level skill to see the nuances and understand what needs to happen and when with a particular athlete, right? And so that's and again, no one's 100% amazing at that, right? It takes a village. It takes a lot of different voices. It also takes a lot of different angles. Sometimes we do things, we have to try a lot of trial and error. Sometimes the plan is everything, the plan is nothing. We go down a certain route, we go down that way, and then we go back this way, we go back this way. And then, towards the end, we're kind of just, self-adjusting until moving towards the target. Sometimes we realize when we go that far, it's like, okay, we went a little too far this way, right? And then we got to come back this way. And it's like, it doesn't mean that part of that journey was good, but now we also know how far is too far. Yeah. We know how far of this is too much. We know when, again, there was some benefits this way, but now we're going to come back forth and adjust course. It's like bumpers in the bowling lane, right? Too far left is a gutter. Too far right is a gutter, right? Like, and it hits nothing. So, those bumpers kind of keep us in range, right, of getting us and directing us towards our actual target where we're trying to go. And as you become a better and better coach, you start learning more and more where those bumpers should be, and helping athletes avoid some of the gutters as much as possible, even though it's good for us to go in the gutters because then we also appreciate the bumpers.
Yeah. Learning lessons too. And then also too, really like the last thing in my head is just, there's so many different levels to this game, from youth to little league to travel ball to high school, college, JUCO, D3, D2, D1, minor league, indie ball, pro, private facility, on field, all these different, again, like channels of the river that are all trying to get people better. And again, like if you're a on-field coach that has a bunch of hitters that already move really well, whether you recruited them or built them or whatever, right? You may be talking a lot of approach, but that doesn't mean the person that's teaching movement in the private facility, 2 hours away from you that you saw their social media posts is the devil. Like, again, they may have an athlete or a group of athletes that have come to them because they're seeking help on their moves, their mechanics, right? Their technique, right? And like that may be what they need. But also too, that person in the private facility, the person talking approach, they're not also the devil either. It's like it may be where they're at with the hitters that they have at that moment too. Right? And I know I've personally experienced that, like, now being here going on 4 years, I think now, it's like, I've had a heavy amount of like high school, college kids now. And then I've had cycles where like I'm dealing with a lot of freshmen, which is just special time dealing with freshmen, for all different reasons. Right. And it's just like, again, just there's seasons of like what I need to make important to them. And, what I feel like needs to be important to them. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, time will tell and experience. But, again, just, all that too is like perspective, like who are you coaching? Where are you coaching? Different channels of the river, I guess, is kind of like how my head sees it. It's like we're all feeding the river. We're all trying to get, water somewhere. We're all trying to help. But again, like these different channels of like private movement, approach, mindset, on field, again, all every level of the way, youth, pro, along the way, trying to get these people better.
I think that's what scares like a lot of people, right? It scares a lot of people. It's like, oh, there's all these different dynamics. So like, what do I do? Or what I X, Y, and Z, like, with it. And it's like, no, like, yes, all these things are happening, but you got to also remember that they're descriptive, right? These things are always in play, no matter what you teach, no matter what your philosophy. If you keep it simple and you have 4 things that you're teaching, these other things are still happening. How they're processing information, their approaches, all of these things are still in play, right? So in reality, again, when we're talking about getting better, it should encourage you to be like, whoa, there's a lot of things I can get better at. There's a lot of areas where I can improve. There's a lot of areas where I can be a better coach, or, and again, at certain periods of my coaching career, I'm going to outsource more of this. And then maybe as you get more versed or skill setted in that area, you can help that a lot more too as well. Yeah. And there's everything in between. So I think that's also the other resource. And also too, obviously that's why we also came out with our curriculum, which our curriculum has a lot of different angles. Is it the end all be all of like, you're never going to have to consume any other information ever for the rest of your life? No. Right. But it does pull on a lot of different areas within development of understanding, like, yeah, hey, here's an anatomy piece. Here's, psychology and of coaching and how that, things I could be aware of, and when to do not only the point to higher levels of care, but also to like, things that I can mix in with how I'm already coaching. Right. And have better feel for my athletes, all those other things. Right. And then also there's a philosophy piece, right, which is where we're sharing our philosophy and how we train athletes, how we identify where we would start generally, some general, really good practices from a high level can be really phenomenal for you as a coach or an organization. And then we get into the practical application, which is like, hey, these are things that we're actually doing with athletes. This is what this actually looks like played out, rather than just being so philosophical. We're getting into some of that stuff. So we hit on a lot of these different areas when it comes in the sciences early on, where again, the anatomy, the biomechanics, skill acquisition, psychology of coaching, philosophy in the middle of, all of those things as well, what we teach in-house, and spacing and direction and force transmission and how we play all that. And then the practicality piece of how it all plays out as well. Again, it's all of those things together where we're trying to give a bigger glimpse. So that's why we call it the curriculum rather than just a single course, is to cover a lot of these different arenas, right? To really give you some perspective. And so that, because holistically, the best coaches have more backing and are more well-rounded in that way, or at least can know enough about something to know when they need to outsource or to point to somebody else that, or identify someone else that might be able to really help that athlete, or, put them to a certain department, or et cetera.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be good. That's all I had before us wrap up. I don't know if you got anything, like last thoughts.
No, that's all good.
You know what I'm saying? God is good. All right, let's pray it out, and then we'll do our thing. Dear and Father God, we just thank you so much for just guiding us, God, and just being the ultimate wisdom, that we know that wisdom inherently comes from you, God, and opening up our hearts. We just ask you to open up our hearts. One of the biggest issues that we have with learning, God, is this getting in our own way and having our own ego and having our own things that pull us back from you, which is, again, ultimately the wisdom that we're seeking. And so we just ask that you remove those areas and those blocks in our hearts, and those things that are attempts by the enemy or lies by the enemy that are holding us back from getting closer to you, and serving our athletes and serving our community better, and serving one another better, God. And we just ask that you continue to work on us and perform surgery on our heart and remove those barriers. And we pray all these things in Jesus' mighty name.
Amen.
Amen. Well, until next time, Farm System out.